Well, any Star Wars fans out there? Oh, good. I'm so happy to hear that. My family's become kind of fans of the more recent, what do you call it, iterations of Star Wars, Mandalorian and Andor and all the things that are on network apps these days. But I'm still a fan of like the original three, the original trilogy, the George Lucas Star Wars. And there's one particular scene in The Empire Strikes Back that perfectly illustrates the hero's journey, which we talked about last week. We started talking about transformation and change last week, and we're continuing this week. Last week we looked in particular at Paul's letter to the Romans, specifically Romans 12, where Paul says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your minds." This particular verse is meant to help us orient ourselves to the Christian life, the life that Jesus calls us to, the good news of Jesus. And I mentioned the hero's journey last week, which is leaving the world as you know it in some way, leaving your known world and setting off on an adventure of some sort. I love how the euphemism of adventure, because the hero's journey is never easy. But nonetheless, you set off on an adventure of some sort, and it eventually transforms you. So thinking about all that again this week, it brought to mind this scene from The Empire Strikes Back, and naturally, the wisdom of Yoda. So there's a scene where Yoda and Luke Skywalker are in a swamp, and it's dark, and there are things hanging from the trees and creepy crawly things around the ground probably, and Luke looks a little trepidatious. And there's a cave that he kind of peers into, and then he looks back at Yoda, and Yoda, in his very Yoda way, says, "In you must go." And Luke looks back at him and he goes, "What's in there? It smells like death." And then Yoda says, "Only what you take with you." Now, I have to give Brené Brown credit here a little bit, because Brené Brown actually uses this same scene from The Empire Strikes Back in her book Rising Strong, where she talks about the ways in which we have to confront the things that we fail at, our failures or the things where we fall. So she talks about how we rise up from our failures, and she uses this brilliant example in that regard as well. And she says that walking into our stories of hurt and pain and failure are a lot like walking into that cave of Yoda's. It can feel dangerous and foreboding. And she's right. There are some really hard journeys that we have in life that just require us to keep showing up. And the only thing we need is what we already possess inside: courage, dignity, curiosity, perseverance, love, fortitude, endurance. These are all the things that we already have inside of us. And in fact, maybe this is also why Jesus told the disciples to leave everything that they had to follow him. We think it's a call to austerity, that we need to be penniless, that we need to be less materialistic, that we need to not have anything around us if we're going to follow Jesus. But I wonder if it's really more about just showing up with all you have inside of you. Don't leave anything untapped. Bring your whole self and follow me. In fact, I love the way that one writer actually talks about this very thing, because this is what it means to really live the Christian life, if you think about it. How are we leaving behind the things of the world and following Jesus? So one writer, Brian McLaren, writes that the purpose of the Christian faith is pure and simple. It is not an evacuation plan to heaven, but it is a transformation for this earth. A transformation plan built on helping people become loving human beings who build loving societies built on the loving teachings of Jesus. He says after 2,000 years, it's about time for Christians to get serious about their prime directive. To live the Christian life is to allow ourselves to be transformed, shedding all the old stuff that doesn't serve us or the people around us. And from that place, follow Jesus with all we've got. Well, when I read the story of Jacob this morning, Jacob wrestling with God in the night, I think he must have come to a place in his life where he was just ready to do whatever it took to change. Jacob was ready to walk into that cave, however dark, however foreboding it might be. In you must go, Jacob. Jacob was the son of Isaac, you might recall, and Isaac was the son of Abraham, and Abraham was the one whom God called and made a covenant with in the book of Genesis. You probably remember that God said, leave your home and everything you know and move to this new place. Oh, gee, there's another hero's journey story starting, isn't there? Leave everything you know, God said. And he sets off on this adventure. And he says, go to this new place, and not only do I promise to be with you, Abraham, but I promise your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. It's the origin story, by the way, of our entire existence as people of God. That's where it all starts. So Abraham's son was Isaac, and then Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Jacob was a bit of a trickster. Some might say that he outsmarted people. Others might say that he cheated them. But regardless, the upshot is that Jacob came to a point in his life where he was weary of the way that he had been living. He was tired of the game playing, tired of trying to one-up everyone, tired of trying to keep up with the Joneses, tired of the family battles that he had largely brought on himself. He was tired of battling and grudges and life. He was tired of taking advantage of people like he had been, and tired of being taken advantage of. I said earlier that the only thing we need to enter into hard places is what we really already possess, but it's not just the pretty stuff. We have to enter into that if we really want to change, with a willingness to look at all the ugly stuff too. And that's where Jacob was. So when he heard a word from the Lord saying, leave your family and take your livestock and go back to the land of your ancestors, he did just that. He packed them up and started out on a journey. And we all know that a journey is just a nice way of saying things are about to get real. So Jacob comes to this river and he sends his two wives and his children, and we're told all of his possessions, across the river. And then he returns to the opposite side for the night. So here he is alone with no possessions except what he has inside. And that very night, he encounters God. Now, the Hebrew translation here can be either man or the divine, and most people have agreed on the fact that it really was the divine that Jacob was wrestling with, for reasons that become clear at the end, as you heard this morning, when Jacob says, I have seen the face of God. So we have no idea why the two begin wrestling. It's apparently a totally spontaneous and unprompted assault on each other. But nevertheless, here they are in the dark, and we're told that this particular struggle goes on all night long. Until finally, the divine says, let me go. And Jacob dares to say, not unless you bless me. It's an unusual request of an opponent, but I don't think that Jacob saw this particular being as an opponent. What if in our struggles, in our wrestling with God, we dared not to see it as a fight with winners and losers? What if we dared to believe that we are strong enough and worthy enough to pull an all-nighter with God and still demand a blessing at the end of it? What if we are okay with being bruised, getting our hip a little out of joint, as the scripture says, because we are also blessed by the battle itself? That is essentially the spiritual journey in a nutshell, isn't it? It requires us to dig deep, sometimes into some hard things, like, why am I like this? Why am I the kind of person who would cheat my brother? Why do I create this chaos in my family? I don't like how I'm treating people. I don't want to live in fear or anger anymore, Lord. Please, how do I get out of this? But I want you to hear this too. The requirement to do the work of digging deep is not about shame or self-hatred. The requirement is simply to stay close to God, focused on the blessing that is right around the corner. And remember, too, that the struggle happens in the messy middle. We talked about that last week. It happens in the messy middle of your story because that's where transformation is taking place. And that is often the place where a lot of us want to call it quits. You see, before you ever decide to change your circumstances, before you ever set foot outside the door and out into the unknown world, you are just blindly going along with the status quo. Maybe not blissfully, but usually blindly, unaware that anything needs to change or even could change. In AA, they call this denial. But another way to look at it and describe it is that maybe you don't yet see a problem or a need that should change. In the change model process, this is actually the first stage. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know that a better life exists yet. You don't know that you could actually learn to, speak a new language or write a book or become a doctor or any number of things that you might do. It never crossed your mind until it does. And some psychologists call this unconscious incompetence. You're just going along without realizing that something needs to or could change. You don't know what you don't know. But then, something happens to disrupt that pattern. Something comes in and disrupts your world. An idea is planted, a seed. Maybe a death occurs in your world. Maybe a job loss happens, a diagnosis hits us, or someone that we love. And suddenly you become aware that circumstances could change, maybe should change. You now know what just moments ago you didn't know. You know something needs to happen, but you don't yet know what or how to bring it about. So you know now what you don't know. This is also known as conscious incompetence, as you see there on the screen. So we've shifted now from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. And I'm just going to say it out loud. This is a really sucky place to be. It is a very hard place. Everything feels hard in this particular stage of change. It feels unfair. We feel overwhelmed. We feel very incompetent. And we get a little whiny, a little, why me-ish. But this is information gathering territory, this stage. This is where curiosity about yourself and others comes into play. You get some answers, and you also get some new tools, even though they're a little awkward to use. This is a really critical time for us. And before we know it, we've moved to the next stage of the change process, which is that you get good enough at this new way of being that you now know what you know. There's a little more flow to it. There's a little more rhythm. It can still be challenging because we're practicing. We're practicing what we know. But there's a relative ease to it, even though it's still not our native tongue. This is called conscious competence. I'm working the work, doing the thing, staying the course. Eventually, we get so good at this new way of showing up. You get so good at your new you that you don't know what you know. You don't know what you know. You have become unconsciously competent. It just comes easily because it's what you do. It's how you show up. The habit has stuck, if you will. So go you. When, with all the things in your life, that has become a way of being for you. These are the 4 stages of how we all operate when we're going through a change, a transition of some sort. And to a person, the middle 2 stages are the hardest. That conscious incompetence and conscious competence, those are the 2 hardest areas in our journey of change. They make up the bulk of our journey. We talked about that last week too. They make up the bulk, that messy middle of the change process. This is where we have to really commit to the wrestling match. We have to commit to the wrestling and beg for a blessing and stay the course until we get one. So this week, I invite you to ask yourself some questions. Pray about these things in the week ahead. What is it you really, really want? What's your current situation or predicament that you would like to see changed? What in your wildest imaginations would make life better in this regard? What do you need to do? What do I need to do to show up for this new challenge? What is it you want to do with this one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says? How do you want to show up? What do you really need from God right now? What blessing do you want that you are willing to go the distance and stay in the fight? And then think about, too, what supports do you need to get there? Who do you need to reach out to? Where are you going to get that help? All of the epic battles that we have in our lives are battles with guilt, shame, fear, doubt, grief, unforgiveness, our conflicts with family and friends, enemies, communities, the church. These are all ultimately battles with and about God. Like Jacob, we can sometimes feel that we've been brought to the very edges of our strength. So that finally, we surrender. And hear me, these battles are not to harm us, but to transform us. These are holy places, places that leave us blessed and limping all at once. So may we be brave enough to enter into these places over and over again, because God is in the middle of them. We know they're sacred places. So may we, like Jacob, prevail over them as we watch the new day dawn after the struggle. Amen. And let us pray.